Today's last keynote panel will cover technology developments.
I wanted to let everyone know we're going to try something out for the Q&A part. We're using an app, a web app called LiveSift, for folks to send in questions. So if you do have questions as they come up, feel free to send them along. To participate, go to livesift.com. That's livesift.com, and just enter as the event PTC'14. So if folks think they want to do this, you might want to do that now while we're getting set up. And then once you have your question, it'll be real easy. You can type it in, and I'll be able to see them as we go along. If that doesn't work, we have microphones, and we'll do it the old-fashioned way, but we thought we'd give this a try. So this app. So anyway, with that aside for the moment, the topic, technology developments, is obviously pretty broad. And actually, we've already been talking at the conference so far about many of the most important changes that are really transforming the industry. The question that the next folks that I'm going to have on stage are going to help us address is, how do we actually deal with these things? We all know these devices are coming on at increasing numbers. They're using more data than ever before. And all the folks in this room are expected to magically make that work and do it with ever tighter budgets while still investing a ton in infrastructure. And then, so the question is, how do we make this make sense? How do we make this work for you guys as a business so that the end customers get what they want? I couldn't possibly answer that on my own. Luckily, I have a few smart folks that are going to join me and help answer that. So please help me welcome Margaret Dawson, who is the VP of Product Marketing and Cloud Evangelist for HP's Cloud Services, Carl Grivner, who's the CEO of PACnet, and Lou Tucker, who is the CTO for Cloud Computing at Cisco. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. So really briefly, just so that everyone knows kind of what experience you're bringing to this and what you do, talk a little bit about your background, not just what you're doing now, but kind of your experience in your careers, sort of in the sense of how does this position you to help these guys figure out how to run their businesses?
So for me, 25 years in high tech, before that automotive, the last 5 or 6 in cloud computing. Lived in Asia Pacific for 10 years, mostly in Taiwan and Hong Kong, working with high tech companies and the government there, helping them figure things out. So kind of broad experience. Yes.
Yeah, same here. I think we're all going to be the same generation here, 25, 30 years in high tech. Yeah, we're all old. Started originally in massively parallel supercomputing, building large distributed systems, which then became web systems. 2 tours of duty of Sun Microsystems, the last one building actually something called Sun Cloud, and most recently working a lot with the OpenStack community.
So I've been in Asia, Singapore for about 2 years. Prior to that, spent a lot of time in the U.S. Started my career with business career with IBM, and done a lot of different things over the years.
So gang, I tend to write about the consumer end of this, you know, all these devices, all these great applications, all the data they're consuming, and sort of the attitude is that all this stuff magically appears. And it doesn't magically appear. It's very expensive to produce, and one of the big questions is, how do we create a healthy enough ecosystem that everyone that is required to make it magically appear can afford to make it not so magically appear? What are some of the thoughts that each of you bring in terms of how we can create a healthier ecosystem for this explosion of devices and explosion of content on these devices to happen?
Yeah, well, one way actually, and I think that backstage we were talking a bit about how to get involved. And one of the things that we're talking a lot about, software-defined networking, we're talking about cloud computing platforms, is that I actually believe in the open source communities, it's an opportunity for a lot of the more non-traditional players to get involved in the software side of this. So we're seeing, like in OpenStack, for example, all the major tech companies are there. Also the carriers are there. Right. And that's very interesting. I haven't really seen that before. And so they bring the real world experience, and they also need to develop the services and everything else so that they can capture some of that value so they can actually make the investments that we need them to make in the infrastructure.
Why does open source matter in this? Is it just reducing costs? I covered the old Microsoft Linux, and it was about cost of ownership, and it lowers things by a little bit per person. That's not really what we're talking in telecom. Open source is to better define what it is you're doing, right?
Well, and it's also driving innovation faster. So the thing that people need to remember is that one of the things that's happening in OpenStack is that the pace of innovation is so much quicker than if you were trying to do this all yourself. And the way that community is created is it's actually modules. So, networking experts are working on the networking module, storage experts are working on the storage module, so to speak. So you're really taking best practices and core competency from these people that this is all they do, but it's benefiting the entire community. So that pace of innovation, time to market, is critical. But also, if we really want to achieve all the stuff we're talking about, which is federated clouds, and we're all able to move applications and the portability of that, the only way we're going to do that is with open APIs.
And I want to take a moment. We have kind of a stacked deck here. All three of you are involved in OpenStack.
We didn't know that, though, before, that we were all pro open source.
I want to know, it isn't like the whole industry has decided this is the way to go. I mean, the AT&Ts of the world have constantly...
They really have.
Smart ones.
Look at the number of companies that are involved. What it's indicative of, I think, is that the industry is recognizing that it requires cooperation. We've got to compete like hell in the marketplace for customers and everything else like that.
Right.
But when it comes to building basic software platforms, that's where we need to collaborate.
But you still have a ton of people building out proprietary APIs, proprietary clouds.
Build it into their hardware, exactly.
Yep.
Right,
Exactly
right, making it very hard for interoperability or integration.
I mean, I go to these things. I was just at AT&T's developer forum at CES, and their big thing is, oh, we've got all these APIs to open our network, but their APIs aren't the same as Verizon's. No. And, these developers, these poor, small 2- and 3-person mobile things, they just came out with a cool game. Now, they've got to develop for iOS, they've got to develop for Android. AT&T saying, oh, you can develop, get 10% better battery life if you, write for our network API. Why is there still this debate over whether it's better to develop proprietary?
I think it's, everybody trying to be the smartest kid on the block more than anything else. We announced 3 months ago a network as a service, network in the cloud at the OpenStack conference. And for all the points that were mentioned is we will, what's interesting about it, I compare it to when the iPad first came out, a lot of people used it for email and applications were developed. So we've announced the network in the cloud, which we've been told by many that's the first in the world to do something like that. And so people say, what are the applications for it? And that's part of the beauty of all this is the customers will develop the application. We talk to big banks, we talk to big software companies, and what they say is, give it to me, I'll figure it out, and then we'll become part of it. So I envision it's not just going to be a PACnet thing. What we want to do is we got to get other providers into it. And I use the analogy, I want to be Cisco certified in terms of network certified, that my network fits in that cloud and all of my customers can use it. They'll figure out the applications for it.
And you come to it from the perspective of the world's going to be a better place if I get people writing to something that works on my network versus spending their time writing something PACnet specific. You might get a couple local customers, but you're not going to get the biggest companies in the world to spend a lot of time doing something PACnet specific. One of the questions we talked about backstage is whether some sort of standardized API effort would work. And somebody's actually asked this question, so I'm going to test out the system and see if this question displays. But would a well-standardized API support innovation? I guess the broader question is, can we get to a well-standardized API?
For the last couple of years, I've been asked many, many times by all the different standards bodies, please participate and let's define the cloud API standard. And my response has always been, it's too early. And what we have today is actually Amazon, let's face it, is setting the standard and they're capturing the largest developer base. Developers write to the largest platform. And so what we're seeing instead is something like OpenStack and other open source projects that are using the same APIs so that they can actually create a much larger platform for all the developers to go after.
I think there's some onus, though, even on the Amazons of the world, to also embrace a more, open standard. I mean, we look at in the old days, and even now, with many, carriers and telecoms, there's a feeling that if I keep my system proprietary, I have revenue protection.
Right.
And all you have to do is look at Microsoft and the operating system to know that actually is not true. That fighting the wave of open source or fighting the open community is not going to protect your revenue. It ends up being the opposite. And so what you've got to be thinking about is how do you embrace these open standards and then add value to that so that even your infrastructure is creating more value, like we talked about, right? There's still a lot that you can be doing to have value-added services, even if you are embracing the open standards.
And I think when we actually talked about the cloud platform at OpenStack, when we developed the network service, originally called Quantum, now called Neutron, we had that in mind.
Right.
that we needed to be able to have a set of APIs that everybody would adhere to, but then there's plugins to the proprietary infrastructure underneath it,
Or
so that you can
above,
have differentiation.
right?
And then there were extensions
Right.
Yeah,
that
but
you
the-
could
but
put
the-
alongside. So you can have competition there, but you also can have the standardization
That's
at
right.
the same time.
Exactly.
As a service provider, we don't build the Cisco routers, we don't build the HP servers, we don't do any of that stuff. We integrate it all. So the most important person in a service provider company is the CIO that has to put all that stuff together. But we are dependent on the hardware people to develop the APIs. And a lot of them don't want to do that because they want to keep it close. Or somebody's going to come out with my own network as a service, but you have to use my infrastructure. That's not a good solution.
And to your point, and this is a number of the questions that I'm getting are saying the same thing. I think a lot of the folks are in your shoes saying, I don't create these things that you guys create. What role can you guys play, the big companies of the world, to help set these standards, to help define these APIs that do move beyond your own proprietary stuff? Because I think there's a lot of folks sitting in Carlsbad where it's like, what do I do? It's not clear to me how, I'm all
Well,
for it.
I think we're already doing that. So if you look at, HP and Cisco compete heavily in many ways. But when it comes to OpenStack, we actually have people on the same development teams and areas projects that we are collaborating and contributing to these projects for their success. So, we've both committed, and you can look at, there's many other vendors, IBM and many others that have done the same thing. So, what we see is, we're going to add value by being the company that provides hybrid cloud solutions in the enterprise. OpenStack is how we're going to do that. And obviously, we're adding a whole lot of our own innovation and expertise. And that's what I would say the same to all of these companies is that, you work with many different vendors. You should be collaborating with each other, but finding what is your secret sauce? What is the thing that you're going to do to add value to gain that customer business and to gain that trust? And we're doing it in different ways.
I want to take a step back and look at the overall health of the industry, because I think if we don't have if each piece in the puzzle, in fact, if one big chunk of the pie isn't healthy, it really has a huge impact. And there's, one of the questions that folks said is, what are the actual network innovations that will help keep carriers relevant? And I think broadening out that question, if there's all these great services, but they're not benefiting the carriers, and the carriers are the ones that have to spend the money on all this great network infrastructure, how do we get to a place that's healthy enough to support the innovation that I think everyone in this room, and even the end consumer, really wants?
Yeah, I think that is a key question. And I think that what we're seeing, though, is that particularly, I think in the last 18 months, I've seen a big shift. And that all the major carriers are recognizing, guess what, we've got data centers. So we actually can provide new services. We can provide services, and we can actually compete with a lot of the Googles and the Amazons and everybody else by offering services, and they're hiring now people out of former web companies so that they can actually start to offer these value-added services, because that's where we know that the money's going to be there. The dumb pipes and everything else like that is becoming commoditized.
Is there a reason you looked at me when you said dumb pipes?
No, you brought it up before. You brought it up
no,
before.
we talked about it before. I was told pipes should be dumb.
That we know it's a services market, and that particularly when you get into now the immense pressure that's going to be on these data centers and on the pipes in terms of bandwidth and the amount of data that's going through this, I think there's tremendous opportunities for new services around guaranteed delivery of that bandwidth, around being able to do reservations for that, and then providing services direct to consumers. A lot of the companies we're working with on OpenStack are it's public knowledge. We're working with Comcast. Well, they're delivering a video service.
Right.
So they have their data centers, but they're getting into consumer services, and that's what they're going to compete
Well,
with.
and it's what we talked about this morning too, that it's not like you're going to rip and replace your infrastructure and immediately put in, SDN and all of these latest bells and whistles. So the first thing is that this is a journey both for you and for your customers. So think about how to phase in a lot of these new areas, and you talked about that. It's not like SDN is going to show up
Happen overnight,
across your
right.
data center tomorrow.
Yeah.
So think about how to bring those in. And then I think the other thing is, what can you do today to monetize your infrastructure with new services, not only in what Lou was saying, but in that flexible capacity services. So monetizing things in a subscription base and delivering those, even if it's on-premise infrastructure, in a cloud-based economic model, so that you start to move yourself towards that area, and also becoming an expert in a solution area. So maybe disaster recovery is something you could do. So thinking even at the very top of the stack from a solution aspect, what can be your niche with your customers?
But you're right, it's a journey because you got so much infrastructure out there. Right. But you have to bring it up to a level that allows you to interface, use software as an interface, because a lot of the stuff is old and you're starting to migrate through it. That takes years. It's not, you can't just do it overnight. So, it would be nice to say, bang, I got it all, but you got to put the new stuff in place in order to make it
and
happen.
monetize
as well.
it along the way.
And
right?
monetize it along
So-
the way. And then also develop new ideas and new applications for it as you're doing. Otherwise, why continue the journey?
Jeffrey Moore has a number of talks he's giving now around talking about difference between systems of record and systems of engagement. The system of record, which were traditional enterprise apps, finance and everything else like that, we solved that with the Y2K problem. We went through all of the systems, we fixed them all, they're probably not going to change a whole lot. They're done. Systems of engagement is how companies are going to engage with their customers, engage with their partners. And that requires a very different notion around what is networking. You want to create networks that can connect up to all of your electrical power grid meters. You want to create networks of all of your consumers on different devices.
So I think a lot of the folks, and I'm seeing this reflected in the questions they're sending, are like, that's great, we agree, we want to deliver those services. What do those look like? Is there anyone out there that's actually doing this? Is there a model of one of your guys' customers or that you can point to and say, here's how they're becoming more than a dump pipe. Here's the service they're offering that they're getting paid for.
Sure. Use yourself.
We developed the network as a cloud. We've got a large, probably one of the world's largest banks in New York City that they send their interns, 500 interns out to Asia every year. Sometimes they put them in Singapore, sometimes they'll put them in Beijing. They move them all around. So they want, as one of my large customers described it, they want liquid bandwidth. They want to be able to move it around. They want to be able to move their server applications around. They want to be able to back up data in different locations. So they're very excited about what we call the PACnet-enabled network or network in the cloud because it allows them that flexibility. They don't want to buy a line for 2 years or on a contract month to month. It takes forever to provision. They want the flexibility to move that application around. This particular one is a learning application or a finance application, wherever they want, as flexible as they want. So that's something that's new and different than we've seen in the past. And we're billing it not on an annual basis, but you can buy it by the hour. You could buy it by the day. You could buy it by the week. It's a cloud application for the network. And we think it's one of the first in the world.
So I think one thing they can do, get more involved in software. They have to hire the way software is designed today is very, very short development cycles. Not long 18-month projects with waterfall diagrams. It's very, very quick innovation of these small, and fortunately services lends itself to that model. You have these small discrete services that can be plugged together to create these different value propositions.
And that's exactly how we did, exactly the way you described it. It's very quick, it's very fast now.
I think some of the fastest folks that I've seen are some of the co-location providers are probably doing it faster than others because they're able to leverage the fact that they have so many enterprises and even cloud providers using their infrastructure. So the more that I think that we can do as an industry to leverage our infrastructure and start to be almost a colo for our customers, it's going to drive automatically that modernization because your customers need it.
Is there a forum for the hardware? Is there a forum to bring this together? Sorry, I'm just...
Yeah, no. I mean, I think a lot of the folks in the room are like, where can we sort of share these sorts of things?
Well, I think it's also to look for vendors that have the kind of trusted advisor capability with you.
Of which, of course, HP does.
Yeah, I'm very hesitant to ever be a company commercial, but I think that it goes two ways. One is that you need to find partners that are going to do that for you, but the other thing I would say to you is that if you don't have a professional services capability today, you should be thinking about that too, completely separately from your technology and your infrastructure, because your customers increasingly want someone to help them on this journey. So it's got to go both directions. So you need to gain both that capability of how do you put yourself on that journey working with your trusted advisors, and then how do you become that role for your customers? Because whether it's an SMB up to enterprise, everybody wants that services support. It's a very different relationship.
Not to mention, I think that's something that companies find they get paid for. I mean, HP went through one of these transformations where the stuff that it was selling was increasingly commoditized, and one way to increase value was to say, we'll sell you the box, but we'll sell you the box and show you how to make that box make money for you.
Right.
And there's an opportunity, what I hear you saying is there's an opportunity for your customers, the
Exactly.
service providers.
It's the sell to, sell through model, right? Is that you can both, we're selling to you, but we can also sell through you, or you take what you are doing with that vendor and also then providing that.
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't also ask you guys, security, privacy, we're hearing a ton about that. How much of your time and energy do you expect to get sort of sucked into the security question, and how much value do you expect to get out of it? Is it something where it's going to take up 30% of your time, but you think you'll be able to get people to pay for that time, or is it something that the industry is going to spend a lot of time on and not get value for?
Well, I think it's a minimal expectation. I think it's just, I don't think you can equate price and value on that particular one. And as we said earlier, it's no one will ever claim, I don't care who you are, that you're totally foolproof in terms of,
Right.
of security issues, but it's an expectation certainly from a customer perspective, and it's a constant. It's constant. You're always looking for the next thing, whatever it's software, hardware, whatever, to continually improve that.
And the cyber attacks are getting really good. So if you think about it from like a coevolution sense or whatever, that their technology is evolving so fast and it needs the countermeasures that the service providers have to be able to develop just as quickly. So I think that as more and more recognition comes in of the real financial impact that breaches are causing companies will pay. They will certainly pay not to have that happen to them.
Yeah. I think also, one thing that I talk about a lot is look at the business model of the organization you're working with. If the business model of the cloud computing vendor or of that organization is to make money off information from its customers, so they're monetizing the information from those customers, chances are privacy and security are not the biggest concern. But if your model is making money off the customers in which the data is being held, then obviously security and privacy are of your utmost concern. So it does make sense to look at just the business model of that company that you're working with.
And it's not a ubiquitous answer. It's going to be different, especially in Asia, in each country that you're in. They'll have different laws, different security levels. China's certainly different.
Talk a little bit about that, because I think geography, I came into this discussion, one of the things that strikes my mind is there's a lot of capabilities that the folks in this room and you guys can deliver to make your network better prioritize certain data that in the US, for example, net neutrality says you can't actually prioritize those data.
Right.
Talk a little bit, Carl, about how geography matters, and then I'd also like to hear
It
from
matters
you
in
guys.
a couple of ways. One, I was with a large US customer back in the summer, and they had what I would consider a fairly simple issue getting something, and this is Fortune 500, something simple they couldn't get done in China. And because we have a joint venture there, we got a lot of good relations, we got it done very quickly for them. And I was amazed because I would have thought, as big as they are, they had all the resources available, but they just couldn't get this. It was a simple server. They couldn't get it across the border into China. And then you go from country to country. You have to deal with the different legal issues. And I think there's an impression that you can open up your network to anybody at any time. It's not true. There has to be a legal warrant. There has to be responsibility on both sides on how the data is going to be used, and it's not open in the sense of OpenStack in terms of what information. And in China, you can't move any proprietary or any individual information outside the country. So that changes things if you're trying to sell something in. And so there's a lot of different things that happen. And one of the impressions that I've seen in Asia from Western companies is that Asia is the same. It's homogeneous. It's not. And Thailand's different than doing something in Singapore or Hong Kong or whatever. And so you've got to have your people. People are actually become really important in getting things done in each of the countries, because the network may be ubiquitous, the hardware may be ubiquitous, but the laws and everything else are different in each of those countries.
Not to mention connectivity.
Connectivity
you've got a lot of other things. I mean, we talked about that this morning with the guy from Cook Island. So you've got a huge bandwidth differentiation.
Yeah.
But you also have the benefit with some emerging countries where they've actually leapfrogged. Where they didn't have the baggage almost of traditional infrastructure, and they've been able to go straight to wireless, straight to fiber to the pillow, and so it really varies, and you could have advantages actually over disadvantages in some cases.
Lou, are you and Margaret, are you guys getting brushback from countries overseas more hesitant? Being from the US used to be a big selling point, but with all that's been going on with the NSA? Are people more hesitant to do business?
More about public cloud. I mean, you really don't get a lot of pushback in general. I think the only place that starts to come up is when they're talking about public cloud services and where are the data centers and would you have to turn over my data and things like that. So first of all, you have to talk about the fact that nobody just turns over data, that you do it based on the law and all of those things. And so there's some standard policies that everyone follows. But places like Canada, Germany, there are certain countries where that's hyper vigilant. And then you look at partnerships, you look at ways to leverage infrastructure within those countries. But I think we're going to see kind of this two-edged sword where we see increasingly governments trying to lock down and create more data sovereignty, and businesses and consumers, wanting to push it open. And so we've started seeing that tension. Security is part of that, but I think we're going to continue to see that. And at the end of the day, the consumer is going to win out. Look at how hard it is for people to try to stop Twitter in Syria or whatever. I mean, there's a certain level of demand, going back to your very first statement, that just becomes a rolling snowball.
Yeah. And I think we're going to see, data sovereignty issues are paramount. It's one of the things I think that's stopping us from seeing one or two large global cloud providers happen, because data is actually controlled by, has to be resided in the country. Their laws are different there. So I think we'll see the emergence of some interesting new technologies around being able to tag data so that you really know where it's been, where it's transited, and everything else, which again, people then have requirements that you have to be able to audit where the data actually has.
It's a huge opportunity. Data tagging and classification, I think, are going to be huge growth areas.
I would agree.
A couple more questions that folks have sent in. Can you talk a little bit about how, we've talked very broadly across industry, we touched a little bit on geography. How is this different across industries, and are there industries that are particularly ahead? Obviously you have some heavily regulated ones like medical and finance, but what about education and energy? Are there some examples of some industries that you see really leading this?
I actually think it's getting more complex. You have, the desire on most of our, 20-year-olds today to share all of their information publicly, and it's just part of the way that they are viewing the world. And then you have privacy concerns around that, that wants to push it the other way. You have in education, we're seeing that university courseware now is available everywhere in the world. So I think we're the banks are going one way, and sort of the rest of the society, I think, is actually going in an opposite direction. Towards
so I
much
hear
more
generationally too, like we've talked about geographically in industry, but how important is it going to be that, 10 years from now, hopefully sooner, there's going to be, we're all going to be, they're going to yank us all off, and they're going to put in 20-somethings who've never grown up with these expectations of privacy and who have grown up with these always available services. Are they?
The whole privacy thing and the whole consumer thing and how it's, the younger generation is more open to it. My son was a prosecutor in the Air Force, and the number one tool they used on most cases was Facebook. Somebody would say, I was there. Nah, that's not what it says here.
Yeah.
Off to whatever. Right. And so the whole privacy thing, I think it is a generational thing, and it's a whole way, it's a whole other way of looking at
so Scott
things
McNeely's quote when I was a son and actually running Sun's infrastructure and had to defend it, which was, you have no privacy, get over it.
Yeah, get over it.
And I think it was actually the right statement.
Well,
what you need is then as a response. So get over the fact that you have ultimate privacy. Yeah. What you have to be able to say is privacy around what? And that's where I think from the medical establishments and things like that, we're going to see, back to data tagging and everything else, certain information we want to be able to keep secure, we want to keep it encrypted, we want to know where it's been. Other information we want to be widely dispersed and available for everybody.
And kind of doing that with access controls. When you were talking, I was thinking of, network security 101, which your default is they're evil, until they're proven innocent. And I think that, we need to continue to kind of look at that as we build out.
And there is no more perimeter. So perimeter security is done.
Right.
It just doesn't exist anymore. People walk in and out of their buildings with their.
I can't believe you're even having to say that.
Well, but
people still think that they can protect.
There is no
protect
perimeter.
things by having a perimeter.
Get over it.
It seems to me that the single biggest revolution, in our lifetimes has been this mobile computing. We all have this incredible power, and yet for businesses, I think, and we were talking about this beforehand, they're basically, the most forward-thinking are just figuring out how to at least keep those secure. What is it going to mean that every worker has this, and how long is it going to be before businesses are able to take advantage of the fact that we all have these? And is there an opportunity for the folks in this room to create services that benefit from the fact that every worker has this?
Well, I think there's two stages to that. One is that businesses, I think, in 2014 are finally getting their head out of the sand and realizing that the rogue devices, rogue clouds, or shadow IT, whatever we want to call it, is there. They can't ignore it anymore, because the past couple of years, if you ask them, oh, are you doing cloud computing solutions? They say no. Oh, do you have your employees using cloud-based applications and services? Oh, yeah. So you have cloud in your office.
Well, and even if they didn't, there was probably a team collaborating on Dropbox.
How many of your developers are using a cloud-based platform to build applications that, by the way, somehow have ended up on your enterprise network? So you kind of have that whole movement where they've got to get more control. They've got to decide what side of the fence they're going to be on. And then the other side you're talking about is absolutely everybody can be providing the infrastructure and the platform or the environment to allow easy development of these applications, these mobile applications, the whole gamification, because that's what employees want to use. They're
and it strikes me, for the service providers of the world, there's an opportunity. Those businesses, still, they can monetize at a rate that's going to be tough if you've just got to charge a consumer per gigabyte.
Well, if you don't want your employees bringing in, file sharing and collaboration, consumer-based apps, you've got to give them the ability to use a similar application that is delivered by the enterprise.
I think Gary's itching to get in. Do you have services like that?
I mean, no, we don't have services exactly like that, but certainly enabling our customers is the key for us, because the more they use, the more bandwidth they consume, the more whatever. I mean, we all know prices continue to decline, but by the same token, usage continues to climb. I mean, what's every cell tower need? It needs a piece of fiber. It doesn't want a piece of copper. It wants a piece of fiber. And eventually that piece of fiber wants another piece of fiber. So it's all good.
It's all good
for us.
That's right.
What's that? It's a network effect.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Well, I'm sure we could keep going for
no, not really,
a long time. Or we've actually shared all of our insights. So I want to thank Carl, Lou, and Margaret for a great discussion, and hopefully we'll continue it in the hallways and stuff, and bug these guys in the hallway on how to make your businesses better.
Thank you much.
Great.
Thank you.